Who raised you more? Your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
They say the little things aren't supposed to break you. They say you should be bigger than a missed call, stronger than a delayed, "I'm proud of you," mature enough to understand that sometimes people just forget. But when it's the people who gave birth to you, the ones who dressed you in pink bows for kindergarten pictures but couldn't be bothered to show up for the biggest day of your life, somehow, the little things feel like a goddamn earthquake under your feet. The kind that doesn't just shake the furniture, it knocks down everything you thought was holding you up. The morning of my college graduation, I woke up alone in a bed that barely fit me, in an apartment that smelled like burnt coffee and textbooks. I had worked 2 jobs to pay for it, weeknights at a diner and weekends stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. And yet, I still believed that when I stepped out into that stadium, my mom would be sitting in the front row, clapping like she did for Stacy's high school cheer competition. I believed she'd be holding one of those stupid balloons that said, "You did it," or waving like a lunatic. I believed, for one final, desperate time, that she would see me. Instead, at 7:15 in the morning, I opened my phone to a group chat photo. My sister Stacy, wrapped in a plush white robe, holding a champagne flute like it was an Oscar. Mom sitting beside her, smirking with that tight, surgically perfected grin, her hand on Stacy's knee like they were 2 best friends on a spa day sponsored by Motherly Neglect. The caption under the photo read, "Self-care day with my favorite girl woman in steamy room sparkles, woman getting massage, #detox before drama." That was their excuse, right? That Stacy had been through a lot lately and wasn't feeling emotionally safe enough to be in large crowds. That she had anxiety. I guess my 4 years of sleep deprivation and self-doubt didn't qualify as emotional distress. I didn't text back. I didn't even react. I just stared at the screen, my coffee going cold, wondering what kind of performance I was expected to give now. Smile for the cameras? Pretend I wasn't humiliated? Deliver a valedictorian speech to an audience where the 2 people who should have been in the front row decided to get their cuticles done instead? People think valedictorian speeches are glamorous. They think it's the moment when the smart girl gets her flowers, when she gets to shine. But nobody talks about the speech you don't give, the one you practiced in your head 100 times, with the jokes and the thank yous and the part where you look up at your family and see your mom's eyes glassing over with pride. That was the speech I wrote. The one I ripped up 10 minutes after reading that text. I don't remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, but I do remember brushing mascara over eyes that hadn't cried yet. I do remember zipping up my gown, pinning my hair back, and taking a deep breath like I was about to perform heart surgery instead of give a speech. You know what nobody ever tells you? The loneliest place in the world isn't a hospital room, or a highway at midnight, or some empty house after a breakup. The loneliest place in the world is a stadium full of people when no one came for you. They say graduation is for you. That's a lie. It's a stage play. And the whole cast is supposed to show up. Your family's the orchestra section, laughing when you mess up, cheering when you get it right. Mine? They were at the spa getting facials with cucumber slices and gossiping about Stacy's latest brand deal. I want to ask something, and I'm asking everyone watching this, because maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm the difficult one. Have you ever been told you were overreacting for wanting the bare minimum? Like, just having your mom show up? Just being clapped for? Just having your win matter for more than 20 seconds in a group text? I asked them to come. I did. I asked them 2 months in advance. I even emailed the damn graduation schedule. Stacy left it on read. Mom replied with, "We'll see, sweetie." You know how Stacy's been. Like Stacy's feelings were some endangered species that had to be preserved at the expense of everyone else's. When my name was called and I walked onto that stage, I told myself I was fine. I told myself I didn't care. But the truth is, I was performing. I was performing strength. My smile was fake. My handshake with the dean? Staged. The scroll in my hand? It wasn't even my real diploma, just a symbolic one, the real thing mailed out weeks later. It was all pretend. And I was the only one in the cast that didn't get flowers after the curtain dropped. Back in my seat, I looked down at the speech I had written, my second one, not the cheerful one. This one was sharper, less polished, more real. I had rewritten it between sobs the night before. I wasn't sure if I'd even use it. But when they called me up to the mic for the valedictorian address, I felt something shift in my chest. Like the version of me that had been begging for love finally rolled her eyes and walked out of the room. So I walked up. I stood behind the mic. And I spoke like someone who had nothing left to lose. "My name is Leah Monroe," I said. "And I wasn't supposed to be here. At least, not according to the people who told me I was too serious, too emotional, too much. But I'm here. And I've got something to say." The crowd quieted. I could feel the weight of their curiosity. That was the moment. That was when I felt the adrenaline spike, the same way you feel when you're about to say something you'll never be able to take back. I could see cameras recording. People in the front row leaned forward. I felt the truth climb its way up my throat like a fire that had waited long enough. And then I said it. Slowly. Deliberately. Like each word was its own little victory parade. "To everyone who didn't think I'd make it, now you can watch me win." The stadium clapped. Some cheered. One professor stood and gave me a small, firm nod, like he knew exactly who I was talking to. And me? I stood there with a smile so calm, so deadly, it almost felt like revenge. When I stepped down from the podium, I felt my phone vibrate in the pocket of my gown. It was a message from Stacy. "Mom's losing it in the parking lot." That was all it said. No apology. No context. No congrats. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want one. Not from her. Not from either of them. I just smiled, turned off my phone, and walked back toward my seat, knowing full well that this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There's something strange about the sound of applause when you know none of it belongs to you. Not really. Not in the way that matters. When I stepped off that stage, still feeling the ghost of my mother's absence like a cold hand pressed against the middle of my back, I kept walking as if the echoes of clapping would somehow fill the hollow space left behind by her silence. And while my classmates hugged their parents and took pictures with relatives holding flowers and glittery signs that said things like, "We're proud of you," or "Doctor in the family," I stood alone, holding a diploma that felt heavier than it should have. Like it had absorbed every missed birthday, every cold stare, every time I had to pretend I was okay while Stacy got coddled and excused for simply existing. I tried to keep my chin up, though my throat was tight and my smile ached like a pulled muscle, the kind of pain that doesn't scream, but simmers under your skin until you're numb enough to ignore it. A few professors came up to shake my hand, some classmates patted me on the back, and one girl I barely spoke to said my speech gave her chills, but all I could think about was how I had saved 2 seats in the front row with small, handwritten name cards that now sat untouched and wrinkled, like paper tombstones for expectations that died quietly that morning. And then there was that message, Stacy's message. "Mom's losing it in the parking lot." No context, no emotion, no apology, just an offhand text like she was commenting on the weather or announcing that Starbucks had run out of oat milk. For a second, I didn't know how to respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't trust myself not to say something that would unravel me completely. I imagined my mother in that parking lot, perhaps sitting in the car with her hands shaking, trying to decide if she should come inside and pretend like she hadn't chosen her favorite daughter's skincare routine over my defining moment. But I also imagined her saying it was my fault, that I made her feel unwelcome, that my speech was an attack, that I ruined her day with my negativity. I could already hear the tone of her voice in my head, tight, defensive, always just one sentence away from calling me ungrateful. I didn't reply. I simply turned my phone off and tucked it away, deciding in that moment that if she wanted to feel something, if she wanted to cry or yell or spin a new version of events where she was the victim, then she could do it alone. Because I was done performing grief for people who never showed up when it counted. After the ceremony, I didn't go to the student center for the reception. I didn't go out for celebratory drinks with classmates or take pictures at the class of the year backdrop set up by the fountain. Instead, I walked the long way back to my apartment, heels in hand, cap tilted slightly, my robe catching the wind like a cape that had lost its hero. I passed by families loading into SUVs, parents wiping tears from their eyes, little siblings hugging big sisters in caps and gowns, and I kept walking like I was invisible, because in my world I had always been. The apartment felt cold when I walked in, even though it was summer and the air conditioning was off. I dropped my keys on the counter, hung my gown on the back of a chair, and stood there in silence, staring at a small white envelope that hadn't been there that morning. No name on the front. No note inside. Just a folded check and a receipt. At first, I thought it might be some sort of congratulatory gift, maybe from a relative or someone who had watched my speech online, but the second I saw the handwriting on the receipt, tight, slanted cursive that had corrected my spelling since second grade, I knew it was from her. The check was for $200. The receipt was for the exact same amount, spent at Euphoria Spa and Wellness, a full-day package that included facials, body scrubs, aromatherapy, and a charcuterie board. No card, no message, just money and proof that my absence from her day had been a calculated transaction. She hadn't missed my graduation because of an emergency. She missed it because she chose to. Because she believed, somewhere deep in her curated view of motherhood, that sending a check would somehow balance the emotional books. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that check like it was some kind of joke I hadn't gotten yet. I laughed once, not a happy laugh, but the kind that spills out of your throat when you finally realize something isn't ever going to change. And then, without even thinking, I opened my laptop, logged into Instagram, and uploaded a short clip from my speech, the part where I said, "To everyone who didn't think I'd make it, now you can watch me win." I added a caption underneath that read, "Some moms go to the spa instead of their daughter's graduation." But hey, my degree's not scented, so I get it. I didn't expect much from it. Maybe a few likes from old classmates, maybe a sympathetic DM or two. But the next morning, I woke up to over 10,000 notifications. Comments from strangers telling me they related, sharing their own stories of parents who never clapped for them, who skipped birthdays, who left them waiting at school plays. Some people were angry. Some cried. Some just wrote same. And then someone tagged Stacy's influencer page. Just like that, it stopped being private. For the first time, it wasn't just me whispering in the dark. It was me with a goddamn megaphone, and people were listening. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. The real fallout hadn't begun yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned about my mother, it's that she can't stand being uncomfortable. And my truth? It made her squirm. Good. Let her. It's strange how a memory can live in your chest like an old scar, dormant until someone breathes on it the wrong way, and suddenly the sting is right there again, just as raw as the day it formed. The night after graduation, I sat on my mattress-turned sofa, back pressed against the peeling wall of my apartment, and I thought about the first time I realized my family loved convenience more than they ever loved me. I was 8. Stacy had broken a vase, some heirloom thing that apparently came from my grandmother's first husband's second wife, the kind of artifact only moms pretend to care about once it's shattered. And when Mom stormed into the living room, eyes wide and wild with that quiet, theatrical rage she only unleashed when company had just left and the mask could come off, Stacy was already crying. She pointed at me. "Leah did it." That's all it took. No follow-up. No questions. Just a belt and a sharp lesson in the order of things. Stacy cried, I bled, and Mom exhaled like justice had been served. From that moment on, I knew what role I had been cast in. I was the backup singer to my sister's solo act. I was the understudy for love, there to fill in when someone else couldn't make it, but never the one the spotlight was meant for. And the worst part was, nobody ever said it outright. There was no dramatic confession, no written contract. It was in the silence. In the way Mom's voice lifted for Stacy's tears, but flattened for my triumphs. In the way she always seemed a little annoyed when I needed something and eternally sympathetic when Stacy did. When I got into the honors program, she texted back nice. When Stacy got a seasonal modeling gig in a catalog no one read, she hosted a brunch. That was the rhythm of our family. Leah handles it, Stacy deserves it. So when the video of my speech started going viral and strangers began dissecting every word like it was a cultural manifesto, I should have seen the fallout coming from a mile away. But part of me, some shriveled, hopeful part that hadn't fully died yet, believed for a second, just 1 second, that maybe Mom would finally get it. That she would watch the video, read the comments, see herself through other people's eyes, and realize how small she had made me feel all these years. But what I got instead was a phone call that started with silence and ended with blame. She called while I was brushing my teeth, her name lighting up my screen like a warning label I didn't have time to read. I answered, half expecting tears, maybe even an apology wrapped in prideful awkwardness, but what I got was her voice clipped, trembling with manufactured hurt, saying, "How could you humiliate your family like this, Leah?" I stood there, toothbrush still in hand, foam collecting in the corner of my mouth, stunned into stillness by how easily she had flipped the narrative. She wasn't sorry for missing my graduation. She was furious that people had noticed. She wasn't ashamed of what she'd done. She was ashamed that I had dared to mention it in public. I spat into the sink, wiped my mouth, and told her, as calmly as I could manage, that maybe if she had shown up in person instead of through a receipt for a facial, I wouldn't have had to find comfort in strangers. She scoffed. Actually scoffed. Like I had offended her by expecting basic decency. And then came the deflection, her favorite game. "You always twist things to make yourself the victim," she said, as if my 4 years of grinding through school, holding down 2 jobs, and clawing my way to the top of my class without a single parent in the stands was just an overblown pity party I had thrown for myself. "You should be thanking me," she continued. "I paid for your education. You act like I didn't do anything for you." I laughed, cold, sharp, involuntary. Because of course she brought that up. That one semester freshman year when she covered part of my tuition, then spent the next 3.5 years acting like she was funding a trust fund child. She never mentioned how I begged the financial aid office every semester, how I took on double shifts during finals week, or how I once pawned my laptop and typed a 10-page essay on my phone just to make rent. But no, she paid for 1 semester, so in her mind, she had built me from the ground up. "You didn't pay for my education," I said, my voice flat. "You paid for Stacy's spa day. With the same amount of money, actually. That check you left me? You just reimbursed yourself." The line went quiet. I imagined her blinking, jaw clenched, trying to decide whether to hang up or escalate. She chose the latter. "I don't know what's wrong with you, Leah. Why are you so bitter? Why are you always looking for reasons to be angry?" And that's when it hit me. She genuinely didn't see it. Or worse, she saw it and didn't care. I was a nuisance, an ungrateful mouth that refused to shut up, a threat to the carefully curated image she had built online and in church pews of the devoted, selfless mother raising 2 beautiful daughters, one of whom just couldn't stop airing the family's dirty laundry. Later that night, Stacy messaged me. Not to apologize. Not to say congratulations. Just to deliver another punch disguised as concern. "You need to delete that post," she wrote. "You're being dramatic. It's not a good look." I stared at her message for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, wondering how she could still, after all this, position herself as the reasonable one. Like I was the emotional liability, not the product of years of quiet rejection and second-place ribbons. I typed back slowly, deliberately, every word carrying the weight of 100 things I had never said. "You got a facial. I got a degree. Let's not compare trauma." She didn't reply. But other people did. Hundreds of them. Thousands. My DMs became a confession booth for the neglected, a space for women and men who had been the strong sibling, the invisible child, the backup plan. People shared stories that broke me in ways I didn't know I could still be broken. Parents messaged me too, some to apologize for how they'd treated their own kids, others to double down on their belief that kids today are too sensitive. But the one message that stood out was from a woman named Carla, a mid-level producer for a daytime talk show, who wrote, "Your story hit me hard. We'd love to have you on to talk about toxic families and success. Let me know if you're interested." I didn't say yes right away. I stared at that message for a long time, heart pounding, breath shallow. Because this wasn't just a chance to speak. It was a spotlight I hadn't asked for, but maybe it was finally mine. And I wasn't going to share it. Not this time. Not with them. It's a peculiar thing when truth finally escapes the tight space where you've kept it hidden for so long, buried beneath layers of family loyalty, guilt, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, One day the people who hurt you without bruises would decide to see the pain they caused. Once truth gets a taste of light, it doesn't retreat quietly. It multiplies, echoes, spreads like a controlled burn that no longer cares about the smoke. And by the time my story made its rounds, shared by people I didn't know, reposted by pages with names like Healing from Narcissists and Cycle Breakers, it wasn't my pain anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever sat quietly while the golden child got applause, and they got told to be more understanding. At first, I thought it would blow over in a day or two, that the algorithms would shift their appetite, and the next viral moment would replace me with a dancing cat or a celebrity divorce. But instead, the fire kept growing. People tagged me in threads about emotional favoritism, about silent neglect disguised as tough love, about the invisible burdens placed on daughters who learned to parent themselves before they could even drive. Some stitched my video with their own stories. One woman cried while telling how her father left her piano recital midway through to catch her brother's soccer game. Another man, middle-aged and trembling, admitted he hadn't spoken to his sister in 20 years because she had always been the sun while he was expected to orbit quietly. I wasn't ready for the weight of that solidarity. I wasn't prepared for the way strangers would see me so clearly, how they'd speak of my life like they'd lived it too. But even more jarring was the reaction from my family, particularly my mother, who had once proudly declared at a Thanksgiving dinner that we don't air our dirty laundry, and now found her laundry neatly folded and color-coded across the internet. She didn't call me again, but she made herself known in other ways. Text messages left unread, cryptic Facebook posts about betrayal and the importance of forgiveness, carefully curated Instagram stories showing her at charity events and yoga classes, as if to remind the world she was still the composed, altruistic matriarch and not the woman who chose a spa package over her daughter's graduation. But the worst blow didn't come from her. It came from Stacy, who finally snapped when the backlash began to affect her own digital image. Up until that point, she had remained annoyingly passive, liking comments that defended her, ignoring the rest, occasionally posting selfies in soft lighting with captions about protecting your peace, as if that could absolve her of being an active participant in years of quiet cruelty. But when a brand she was working with, a skincare line she'd been promoting in her graduation day spa post, dropped her from a campaign citing unforeseen negative attention, she came at me with the kind of venom only a sibling can manufacture. Her message was long and messy, written in the chaotic rhythm of someone spiraling in real time. She accused me of jealousy, of using my pain for clout, of ruining everything she'd built just because I couldn't let go of the past. She wrote that I was cruel, manipulative, and worst of all, disrespectful to Mom, as if respect was something automatically owed rather than earned, as if choosing not to tolerate indifference was a betrayal instead of a boundary. She even said, "You think you're a hero now, but all you've done is make people feel sorry for you. That's not strength. That's pathetic." I didn't respond immediately. I let the words hang there on my screen, heavy and venomous, while I stared out the window at the sky turning that soft, cruel orange that always seems to accompany endings of days of illusions, of the version of yourself that used to beg for someone else's approval. And then, after several minutes of silence, I typed a reply that wasn't angry or defensive or cruel, but simply honest. "I didn't ruin anything, Stacy. I just stopped pretending." She never answered. But my inbox kept filling: interview requests, podcast offers, emails from other young women saying my speech made them feel less alone, that they finally understood their sadness wasn't weakness, that they too were done playing the quiet role in a family that never made space for their voice. I read each one slowly, careful not to let the praise turn me into something performative. Because this had never been about revenge for the sake of revenge. It had always been about truth. And if there's one thing I knew by now, it's that truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to stand still and refuse to move. And then came the call that tilted everything again. Carla, the talk show producer who had first messaged me, reached out with details. The show wanted me to come on as part of a special segment on estrangement, emotional resilience, and redefining success outside the lens of family validation. I would be joined by a therapist, another guest who had cut ties with a toxic parent, and a live audience ready to engage. I said yes without hesitation, not because I needed the attention, but because I knew my story, though painful and deeply personal, had become something bigger than me. It was a mirror, and people were finally ready to look into it. The day of the taping, I wore a dark green blouse, strong color, not flashy, and minimal makeup. No heels, just flats. I wasn't dressing for war or for sympathy. I was dressing like myself. When I stepped into the studio and saw the audience, some already teary-eyed from the intro montage, I felt something settle in my chest, not pride, not revenge, but peace. The kind that doesn't mean everything is okay, but rather that you're no longer pretending it is. When the host asked me what I wanted to say to the people who dismissed my story, minimized my pain, or told me I was just too sensitive, I took a breath, looked straight into the camera, and said, sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are the ones who look the best in family photos. And sometimes, speaking your truth means becoming the villain in someone else's story. I'm okay with that. The audience clapped, not the kind of applause you get for being entertaining, but the kind you get when someone finally says what everyone else has been too afraid to admit. After the show, I walked out of the studio into the cool evening air, checked my phone, and saw a notification. Stacy had posted again, a photo of her and mom at the spa, dated back to graduation day, with the caption, "Healing looks different for everyone. We choose peace." The comments were mixed, some supportive, others harsh, a few sarcastic. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Because I knew the next chapter was mine. And I didn't need their permission to write it. There is a peculiar stillness that comes in the moments after everything you feared might happen finally does. It's not relief, exactly, not the sweet breath people expect you to take once you're free, but more like a quiet confirmation that the storm wasn't in your head all along, that the damage wasn't imagined, and that the people you once bent over backward to please are, in fact, capable of watching you bleed and still asking why you stained the carpet. After the taping aired, and after the clip of my final words on that stage resurfaced again across every corner of the internet, I began to understand that for people like my mother, and even more so, for people like Stacy, truth was never something to confront, but something to carefully rearrange until it no longer disrupted the story they wanted the world to believe. The flood of attention didn't fade like I thought it would. If anything, it evolved, turning into long-form essays, invitations to panels, and podcast hosts asking if I'd be willing to talk about generational trauma in 30 minutes or less while sipping herbal tea in a Brooklyn studio. I turned most of it down. I wasn't chasing a spotlight, I was reclaiming a voice. There's a difference. But I accepted one invitation, a keynote address at a women's leadership summit in Atlanta, the kind of event with expensive lighting and catered dinners and soft jazz playing in the hotel lobby, where women in tailored suits and tired eyes sit in rows, clutching notepads filled with aspirations that have been waiting years to breathe. They asked me to talk about resilience. I thought about that word a lot. How often it's handed to women like a consolation prize, how it's weaponized as praise, you're so strong, they say. You've been through so much, as if the pain is the achievement and the surviving is the reward. But what they don't say is that resilience isn't noble when it's forced. It isn't heroic when it's required just to be noticed. Sometimes, resilience is just another word for, what choice did I have? So I flew to Atlanta. I wore the same green blouse from the taping. It felt right. Not because it looked good, but because it had seen me through something. I stood behind a podium in a room full of women who knew what it meant to work twice as hard for half the recognition, and I told them what I had learned, not just about surviving, but about choosing, deliberately and without apology, to stop auditioning for the love that should have been freely given in the first place. I said, we spend so much of our lives trying to earn a seat at tables where we were never meant to be served. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is build your own table, even if the first few meals are eaten alone. The room was silent. Not out of discomfort, but out of that heavy, knowing quiet that happens when someone tells your story using different words. After the talk, people lined up to speak to me. Some hugged me. One woman cried into my shoulder and whispered that she hadn't spoken to her daughter in 7 years and didn't know how to fix it. Another woman handed me a letter and said, "My mom died before I could say any of this. Thank you for saying it for me." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to believe until then, that I had become something to people I never intended to become. Not a voice of reason. Not a role model. Just proof that you can walk away from the people who made you and still recognize yourself in the mirror. And then, like life always does when you think the arc is complete, it offered me one last scene. It happened 6 weeks later, on a muggy afternoon in June, outside the very same campus where I had once stood alone in a cap and gown, pretending not to notice the empty chairs with my family's name on them. I had been invited back to speak to the incoming summer scholars, an intimate event, small, mostly local students and a few professors. It wasn't a big deal, but I said yes. I figured it might feel good to close the loop. I arrived early. The lawn was being set up with folding chairs and white umbrellas. A few staff members waved politely. I stood by the refreshments table, sipping iced tea, rehearsing the bones of what I was going to say, when I noticed someone standing just beyond the parking lot, not moving, not waving, just watching. It was her. My mother. No makeup this time. No styled hair. Just a simple blouse, slacks, and that look on her face that I had never seen before, something between exhaustion and clarity. She didn't approach, didn't wave. Just watched for a long, slow minute. And then, finally, she walked over. We didn't say hello. We didn't hug. She didn't offer any opening line, didn't pretend this was casual or expected. She just looked at me, eyes heavy but clear, and said, "You were always too good for us." I just didn't know what to do with that. There were 1,000 things I could have said, angry things, sharp things, poetic things, but none of them felt right. So I said nothing. I nodded once, not in forgiveness, not in acceptance, but in acknowledgement of a truth that had finally been spoken aloud. She left after that. Quietly. No scene. No tears. Just turned and walked back to her car like she had to be somewhere else, like maybe for the first time, she realized that I wasn't waiting anymore. And I wasn't. When I stepped onto the small stage that afternoon, microphone crackling slightly, sun beating down through the trees, I looked out at the young faces and took one slow breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to hold everything it needed to. Then I said, to everyone who didn't think I'd make it, and I paused, not for effect, but for truth, you were right. I didn't make it to where you wanted me. I made it further. They clapped. And for once, it didn't hurt to smile. Because this time, the applause was mine.